Ready.
Yeah, I don't know, man. You ever just feel like life is just catapulting towards something, like some greater purpose?
Average fat cats with bloated ego. We are the only DJ crazy enough to tattoo Jackie Brown on his ass.
This is Michael Mann, and I ride with
Extended Clip.
Welcome to Extended Clip. It is episode 423, and I am your host, Eddie Averill. Today, I am joined by the filmmakers behind a very exciting new documentary about a band that means a lot to me, and I'm sure means a lot to a lot of the Extended Clip, extended family out there. We are talking about Butthole Surfers, The Whole Truth, and Nothing But, with director Tom Stern and writer Simon Weinstein. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Thank you guys for coming on. It was very interesting how this came together. Simon, we met at a party a few months back, and it was weird. We have a mutual friend, Adrian, and he was like, "Oh, Simon, yeah, he's a big fan of that book you're reading right now, Day of the Locust." And I was like, all right, this guy's got to know what's up. You know, this guy's the real deal. You know, we talked about The Simpsons, we talked about a couple other things, but if he's a fan of that book, then he must know what's up. And then I find out that he's written this awesome documentary with Tom Stern about the Butthole Surfers. Now, the one part of that I think is going to maybe catch people off guard is the phrase writing a documentary. Simon, tell the listeners what exactly is the involvement of a screenwriter on a documentary such as this, telling the story of a great band.
Yeah, it's interesting because I never really knew you could sort of, as a writer, I never knew you could sort of write a documentary. But when I had come, Tom brought me on the project. I sort of started out by watching every sort of single interview they had shot at that time. It was, about like 65 interviews, hours of footage of, with the band members, with Gibby and, with Henry Rollins, of course. And I watched through that and I sort of started organizing the sequences into what I thought the story was and sort of just getting an idea of the story. Of course, I was a fan of the band, or one of my favorite bands of all time. And I reached out to Tom and yeah, I knew the story of the band, from, everything that was already out there, but from these interviews and with Tom's relationship and history with the band, I learned a lot more. And sort of Tom and I together really started piecing together a treatment and a story that we thought sort of worked. And then along the way, kind of getting really deep in. I remember, one night we had spent like hours just working on, what we think, how to segue into this one scene and how to segue into the sort of like low point of the movie. And so it's in tandem with editing. We have a great editor, two great editors, Scott Evans and Nick Farrell, but it sort of is in tandem with what scene goes where. You're kind of writing the movie in the interview stage when you're interviewing everyone, and then you reverse kind of write it when you have all of your footage ready and be like, okay, this is Gibby says this really great line here, so we're gonna put that there. And so yeah, just me and Tom really sort of went into the weeds of organizing this thing and telling the best story and making sure they're the best, portrayal of these guys who are, real characters.
Simon, I had seen you refer to Tom elsewhere as a mentor more than even just a collaborator on this film, and I wanted to know what was the origin of your guys' relationship.
I reached out to Tom. I was a huge fan of his movie Freaked,
Of course.
from the 90s, and his show Idiot Box I really loved. And I just reached out to Tom on Instagram like the day after I graduated school, and he's, one of those guys I think from the kind of like alterno weirdo, camp where he'll just bring people on and really, teach them. I learned a lot. The best thing I think I learned from Tom and I still think about is breaking glass every time you can in a shot. I think Tom, as you'll see, is really good with like showmanship and really just making things as entertaining as they can be. So it's like if a gun is there, it's got to be fired. If there's a shot, if like glass can be broken, if blood can be, exploded, like doing really making those things pop. So I really have like learned a lot just and we have very different tastes in some aspects and then insanely similar tastes and of course weirdo, R. Crumb cartoonist, Mad Magazine style stuff we both really kind of vibe with. So yeah, it's been
Except that Simon likes Dave Berg,
yes, I
lighter
love
side with
yeah.
Dave Berg, and I hate that. So we always torment each other about that.
Yeah, I'm a big Dave Berg. I like the sort of like mundane Dave Berg style, and Tom I think is more of the Basil Wolverton, Don Martin camp, who I also love. Who I love.
Yeah, yeah. Dave Berg ends every strip. It's like, my hippie son won't get a haircut. And then they cut to the father and he goes, like, because the hippie son says something mildly
Yeah,
funny.
something mildly liberal from his college days. He's come back with the guitar from college instead of a degree, and the
Yeah.
dad.
And then it always ends up in the father going,
I wanted to ask about what you had said, Simon, about Tom's sense of showmanship, and Tom, how you apply that into the documentary mode. Obviously something like Freaked or Idiot Box, there's a lot more room to be, I guess, more of a showman in the traditional entertainment sense. But when you're working in nonfiction, it's a little different, right?
it's different, but it's what I was trying to do in this film is make it less different. Like, make it a little more like a biopic and less like a Talking Heads documentary. Not a documentary about the band Talking Heads, which I'd love to do. David, Tina, Chris, and Jerry. But you know what I mean? It's like a lot of rock docs are basically just Talking Heads, Talking Heads. And I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to, I love visuals. I love kinetic. I love mayhem on screen, and I like to entertain. I get nervous if we're sitting on a boring looking shot for more than a couple seconds. I'm like, oh, we got to do something here. We got to entertain the audience. And I think that's one thing I had in common with actually the band, the Butthole Surfers. Like, Gibby is a natural showman too. He wants to entertain, underneath all his insanity. He really just wants to put on a good show.
Yeah.
And I do too, so I think it worked in that way. And like, what's a documentary about a band? I mean, it's the story of the band, right? It's how they began and then how their career went. And I always wanted to tell stories. What are the best stories that the band has? And then when you're telling a story, I want to see it. I don't want to just see a guy telling it. Mm-hmm. That's a podcast. Like, the difference between a podcast and a film is that with a film, you might hear that same VO telling a story that you got on a podcast, but you got to bring it to life,
Yeah, a lot of documentary falls into the traps of, I might as well be listening to a podcast.
Right.
When did you first get in touch with the Butthole Surfers? Because I know you've been involved with them for a long time. That was like the origin of Freaked was going to be a vehicle for them.
That's
and you had done some work with them before that. So when did that all come together originally?
Mid 80s. I was at NYU. And my little group of friends, we were all super into live music, and that was kind of our world, in addition to film, being film students. But there was great live music happening. And so Alex Winter, who was my friend at NYU, he told me about it. He was like, we got to see this band, the Butthole Surfers. They're supposed to be amazing. So we went to this club, 8BC, in the East Village, and this was like 84, I think. And they were amazing, It was just like, whoa, who the hell are these guys? So they just instantly became our favorite band, and we'd see them every show they played in New York. And like a year or two later, it was 86, February of 86, I walked into CBGB's at Soundcheck to ask him if I could shoot the show that night. And that's when I met him. And it was, nice. I still remember it very well because, I was nervous. I was a 20-year-old kid. And I was like, can I check out my camera from video class and shoot you guys? And Paul was super nice, and Gibby was super scary. Like, he was intimidating. But he said yes, finally. And then I made, with a friend of mine, this Alex Halpern, who was another film student at NYU, we made this short film around a performance of the song Cherub, which involved Alex running naked through Grand Central Station. So that kind of impressed them, and they liked the film, and then we became friends, and collaborated on some other things, including a short film we did for this Impact Video magazine called Entering Texas, aka the barbecue movie, which was a sort of a spin on Texas Chainsaw, starring the Buttholes as a
Yeah.
family of insane, butcher happy murderous lunatics. And then it kind of resolves into a music video, and it stars John Hawkes, Academy Award nominee John Hawkes, and that's we use that in the movie too, some clips from that. And
Nice.
yeah, then as you said, Gibby stayed with Alex Winter and I in Venice, California, when we were young, fresh-faced filmmakers trying to make it in Hollywood, and we wrote a screenplay for the original version of Freaked, which was just a horrific, transgressive, super low budget horror film, horror comedy, but like really gory and horrible. And we couldn't get it made. And ironically, the same script we ultimately sold to Fox and did it for $10 million as a more of a studio comedy.
Yeah.
And we had to make it a lot less transgressive, but it was weird. We couldn't get a couple 100,000 to do a trauma style, super low budget exploitation movie like we planned.
Which is so strange because there were a million of those movies back then.
Yeah, that's just, I don't know.
You would think Charles Band or someone like that would throw a bag at you. Yeah.
Really know how they get funded, and we couldn't get it funded. We had a few different producers try,
Yeah.
but none of them succeeded. I remember one guy was like, guys, I love your script, and my philosophy of filmmaking is it has to work here, here, and here. And he pointed to the genitalia.
Oh, God.
And he was like, yours works here and here, but not here.
So it worked in the brain and the genitalia, but
Yeah.
not the heart.
That's right.
That is awful. That is like the kind of thing, like in that Woody Allen movie where Alan Alda is saying,
If it bends, it's funny. If it breaks, it's not funny.
That's funny. I quote that all the time in a mocking way. And I quoted it when my house burned down in Altadena because my son's wiffle ball bat got like semi melted, so it's like bent, but it's not broken. So I'm like, that's funny. It's hilarious.
well, I'm really sorry about your house.
That's okay. It's just a house.
That's a good way to put it. Well, I'm curious, actually, now that you bring up seeing them in New York, since they were a Texas band and touring around at that point in time, what kind of bands were they playing with when you saw them in New York in like 84 or whatever?
I remember one time they played with Nice Strong Arm.
Okay.
Have you heard of them?
No, that name is not even vaguely familiar to me.
Yeah, I don't know.
I feel like I know a decent amount of music from that era too.
I just said it because I remembered the poster.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really about the other bands. Whenever I went to see the Buttholes, it was just the Buttholes, really. It was I never, like, they were such a singular and kind of like, you can't follow them. You can't follow that act. Like, that's why when they opened for Nirvana, it's like you're getting a pale imitation of the glory of the prime years Buttholes shows, because after the Buttholes left the stage, nobody can walk onto that stage. It's just like you've just decimated everybody's brain, and you don't want anything else at that point. So, the other bands we were into was the Meat Puppets, Minutemen, the Cramps, all those great bands were all playing at that time. And I remember seeing the Chili Peppers I lived right next to the Ritz, and we saw them, and they were on the circuit, and they were really fun. They were great. It was like they had a good stage show back then, and with the original lineup,
You never really hear about, like, at least from what I've seen, like I've seen gig posters of, Meat Puppets or Scratch Acid opening for Butthole Surfers, but you never really hear it's never like a traditional punk show where there's like five different bands, from
Yeah.
Yeah.
SST and everything. It's usually just Butthole Surfers. We've heard weird stories again, like these weird bands that are just one-off that have opened with Butthole Surfers. Like there's one that Paul told us about called like Gregory's
Oh
Funhouse,
yeah, yeah.
which is like it's again it tracks for Butthole Surfers, but it was some weird. They were like almost a Christian band, and Paul said that the lead Gregory brought them back into like the back room, and because Butthole Surfers have a crazy stage show with projections, and Gregory was like, "I want to show you something real fucked up," and it was a picture of a Bible. There was just a Bible on the screen next to a ladder. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, just a piece of shit drops onto the Bible, and they pan out, and it's like Gregory taking a shit on the Bible. So it's like guys like that were opening for Butthole Surfers, and sort of faded out into existence. But Butthole Surfers were able to maintain, their relevancy and not, shit on any Bibles.
There's an odd aspect to this where, like people interviewed in the movie include people that I don't know, in certain scenes at least, are like modern legends of comedy. Eric Andre, John Glazer, for certain people that were really into that style of alternative comedy in the 2000s. I feel like, and there's the reference in The Simpsons, and I know that Sharpling and Worcester have used the Butthole Surfers as a reference a few times. Why do you think it is that like comedy people are so drawn to this band? Because I wouldn't like, they have a sense of humor about them, obviously, but I wouldn't necessarily say like, I'm going to throw on Rembrandt Pussy Horse and laugh,
No, but they were funny. They were,
They're funny, and they're not like a comedy rock band to me. Like,
Yeah,
they're not
exactly.
like, I don't know, like, Weird Al or anything, or like,
or the Dead Milkmen, which were
yeah, and like they're like a little bit more like that, but yeah, they're a specific type of funny. I remember Tom always says it scratches an itch, but where it's like they'll say things that are funny, you don't really know why they're funny. Like, their song Revenge of Amos Presley, which is, funny because it's just a total mockery of Henry Rollins and, hardcore bands at the time. Where he's just going on this crazy ego trip and stuff, and it scratches an itch that for like, especially that are people that are into weirder comedy that's not like outright, goofy, silly, they might be giants type stuff, but more
Yeah.
like, oh, again, like Eric Andre is a perfect example. And Eric Andre is also a huge music nerd. He knew everything about the band when he interviewed him.
it's a tone. It's a dark comic tone, I think, for a certain kind of person it's scary and funny at the same
Yeah.
time, It's disturbing and funny. It's not ha ha, set up punchline. It's just it's kind of, if you have a certain take on the world, it's gonna hit the bullseye for you. And it did for me. I mean, that's what it's like the way in is like, first of all, you're like, what the fuck? It's this overwhelming kind of musical performance art thing that's just crazy, like a circus,
Yeah.
but a surreal circus that's got great music. It's like an all-encompassing entertainment or experience, a sensory overload sort of experience. But then there's legit, really funny shit too, like, little strange bits of dialogue and
Yeah.
and Gibby's just funny. Gibby's a naturally funny guy. So it was infused with, this sense of humor. And Eric Andre, he carried that on. He lists them. This isn't even in the movie because, you can't put most stuff in the movie that you got in interviews. I think we put it in a bonus thing we put on the internet, but he credits them as being like a huge inspiration for his performance style. And he would like, because he liked to do that transgressive, shocking comedy where he'd get naked, like Gibby got naked, and fuck with the audience. And then, he said every time he left the stage, he'd be like, fuck, I'm a poser. I didn't go as far as the Butthole Surfers did, Like he'd always be racked with guilt about not being as extreme as the Butthole Surfers. So that was kind of funny.
Pretty high standard to live
Yes.
up to.
Yeah. They're like that era of like punk music to me, I think like the best punk or post-hardcore, whatever you want to call it, is the stuff that's funnier, but not outwardly funny. Like, I love Ween, but they're sort of outwardly going to, trying to be, silly or whatever. Not always, but I love Ween. But that like you'll listen to bands like Killdozer or Cows or Cherubs, and they're just really good at like Gibby's a wordsmith and stringing together words that are like, oh, that's really funny, or some kind of satirical thing or some sort of phrase. Again, I think Shaw Sleeps in Lee Harvey's Grave and Revenge of Anus Presley is just really good at nailing that kind of macho, satire, that sort of macho, uh, meathead kind of personality.
Yeah, I feel like the biting like cynicism of the humor in his lyrics is closer to like The Fall than it is Ween or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
they were
definitely.
huge fans of The Fall. Although Mark, apparently they pissed off The Fall when they were at some festival in Europe. They were in the only dressing room backstage, and Marky Smith came and was like, "Who the fuck are you?" It's like, and they wouldn't leave the dressing room.
Yeah, hated by Marky Smith. Alex Chilton from Big Star though,
Yeah.
liked them. They gave him one of their guitars.
I mean, those are two opposite ends of the spectrum of, pure goodness and cynicism.
Yeah.
And I say that as a huge fan of The Fall, obviously.
Thurston Moore told a funny story. He said Alex Chilton walked in at this festival into their room. And he's like, "Can I borrow your guitar, man?" Because he was a train wreck of a guy, and I guess he just showed up without a guitar. And Gibby looked up and said, "Whoa, Alex Chilton, the legend who wrote, the letter and Big Star and blah 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 and blah blah blah. Well, fuck you, man." I think he did the.
Oh, that's a classic bit. For our listeners, Tom's doing the classic wind up middle finger bit.
Yes. But then he was like, "I'm just kidding. You can take it."
Yeah.
But then when he returned it, it was covered with some weird green scum.
Yeah, Teresa called it a green moss.
A green moss, the mysterious green moss of Alex Chilton.
Yes.
That is something for the music scholars out there to look
That's the kind
into.
of thing they latch onto. Like Gibby was talking to Tom recently about like was it green slime or something that's infiltrating neighborhoods? You getting really freaked out?
In Altadena, he saw something in 60 Minutes about a toxic grease that's coating the kitchens of Altadena from the fires.
Oh no.
Yeah, it sounds horrible, but I don't have a kitchen. My house burned to the ground, so I don't have any toxic grease.
Damn.
Thank God for small, triumphs.
I was thinking about like, I don't know, just the way Gibby carries himself in this movie compared to how I had seen him before in interviews. And, I was thinking back to like when he shows up in that documentary about Daniel Johnston.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember his scene in that where he's like in a dental chair,
The dentist,
and I find that very appropriate for him because he's a guy who's always like kind of putting up walls of irony and detachment to kind of get away from a truth. And how did you manage to get so close to a real truth with such an elusive and protective guy?
It wasn't easy.
It was the hardest jobs of our lives, I think.
It wasn't easy, man. It was 5 years of just chipping away at it. And, that's why I knew early on, he's a very difficult interview because, he won't give you a straight answer. And, his default is to deflect with comedy, to be weird and absurd. And after, several interviews, I kept saying, "Okay, can we get a little less Gibby showman and a little more just Gibby real person?" And but it's just he's not comfortable with that, and so he didn't want to do it. And he'd start getting pissed at me, and that's scary. And I can't afford to lose this guy, So it was always this dance of like, how much can I push him to open up more and be less performative without losing him completely, And honestly, that's, I think the reason I was able to is just because I've known him for fucking 35 years. So he does have a trust with me. He knows I'm not some kind of yellow journalist who's trying to make him look bad, At the same time, we both knew early on, it's like, dude, I'm not going to make a hagiography. You guys are better than that. You don't want that. That's a boring thing. And we need to do a warts and all doc that, that goes deep. And he's a smart guy. He knows as an audience member that that's what you want. Like, you have to make a good film, and that's the most important thing. Otherwise, why bother? Um,
Yeah, he understood the show that, again, that kind of showmanship and having heart and getting to like the heart of issues that we're talking about. I think the one of the best things, to Tom's credit, that we did was we, had Gibby show us childhood locations, and I won't spoil anything, but that's, in my opinion, I think, and I'm biased because I was there, walking along with them, but I think that's like one of my favorite interviews that we did, because it's, Gibby does open up about personal things, and really gets to the sort of emotional, I always wanted to do like the James L. Brooks approach to this movie with the, real emotional ooey gooey kind of stuff.
yeah.
And I think that interview really led to it, and and Tom was able to really, get him to open up for that.
And it's like, early on, I knew that I was sort of torn between two different aesthetic directions. One is like, I want to give the audience something of the experience of going to one of those classic shows in the 80s, which is this kind of mind-bending sensory overload. But I can't really do that. There's never going to be a film that does that. It was dependent on being in a physical space with a big sound system and smoke and blah, blah, mayhem, and the possibility of something going horribly wrong, which, you don't have in a film, right? But on the other hand, I was like, we got a documentary has to go deep, or else it's not very good. So like, it's the opposite of what the Buttholes were doing back then, which was like purposely creating this mystique, where you don't know much about the band. And that helps, it helps the power of their performance, because you're like, who are these guys? Where do they came from? But with a doc, you got to do the opposite. You got to demystify them and just explore who they are as people, right? So, it had to be those both things. And yeah, that's we ultimately got the goods. Like, the first cut in September of last year didn't have the scenes we shot in Dallas that are the kind of climax for Gibby's emotional arc. And it was clear to everybody we showed it to that was missing. It was like, we're hearing about Gibby from other people, but he never really goes deep about himself. So I called him and said, dude, everybody says the same thing. And it's, I didn't say this, but it's like, it's what I've been thinking the entire time we've been doing this. You got to go deeper. We got to talk about real painful shit. There's no substitute for it. And to his credit, he did. And it wasn't easy for him, but he did it, like, because he wanted this to be a good movie. He did it. And, it's pretty powerful on a level that surprises a lot of people. Like, one of the most frequent bits of feedback I'm hearing from people is like, wow, I had no idea it was going to be heartfelt and, emotionally deep like that. Cause they assume, like, Butthole Surfers, that's not going to, it's not part of their shtick, but it is in this movie. So I'm happy with that, how it turned out.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that.
And Simon, had the right instinct. Like, he wanted it to be an emotional journey, like a James Brooks film. And he actually wrote for his senior thesis at college. He wrote a screenplay about the Butthole Surfers. It was like a biopic. So he was kind of the perfect person to come on, but he wanted to bring that emotional arc that he'd worked out in a screenplay to the movie. And I was all for it, but I'm happy that he kept pushing that. He was advocating for that, because it's true. It's like, it's sort of similar to when Howard Stern did Private Parts. I remember it's like he wanted to do The Adventures of Fart Man or something, and Ivan Reitman read the script and it was, not that good. And he was like, just tell your story, your real story. Audiences will relate to it better. And we kind of did a similar thing. We didn't go goofy. We went sincere, although there's plenty of funny,
Yeah,
crazy
as
shit in
sincere
the
as we
movie.
can go with Butthole Surfers.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I mean, I wanted to know actually about the distinction between like playing into their level of showmanship and going much more sincere and raw in like actual choices of direction. For example, I'm thinking of a scene later on where Paul was talking about one of the last times he saw Gibby, and like throughout that interview leading up to it, he's petting his cat, much like the Godfather, which we were talking about off mic. And so in this scene, he is like just completely covered in cat hair the way I often am. And I've never seen a documentary crew basically not hit the lint brush in that
thank
moment.
you for
know?
noticing.
Yeah, that was Tom was like the thing I love about these interviews and the ones shot before I even came on where Tom wanted to shoot them in people's houses and like
Yeah.
have it be really personal. Like we didn't want to go to like, oh, we're gonna go to like Formosa Sound Studios and show like a mixing board. I mean, we did for Albini because it was at electrical engineering or whatever, but like, Keith Morris's crazy, weird, dilapidated bookshelves and everything. And I love that was like just doing it like really off the cuff, just in their houses, no like soundstage or anything.
I'm more interested in the reality of someone rather than the glamorized Hollywood standard professional interview setup, which is boring, right? And I thought it was appropriate in this film because the Butthole Surfers are totally punk rock and they're not about being polished and glammed up. And, Hollywood's always done that for a reason because, you want people to look good, right? Like, but I'm more interested in, in leaving the bottles and the junk in the background, just because it's real and it's something you don't see. It's like you watch these documentaries, everything's cleaned up and it's kind of unnatural and it adds a kind of a dishonesty in a way. It adds this veneer of like, okay, let's clean it up and make it look not like it does every day. I always think it's more interesting to see the reality of someone's life, and it says a lot about them as characters. It makes it richer. Like, the Sparks documentary, for instance, was one where they just shot everybody in one, well-lit generic location. And it's like they come in and it's just like, it's just not interesting to me.
And something that Tom noticed as well that, well, Gibby, and it's the reason I think that he chose to do his interview for Daniel Johnston while he was, getting his teeth filled is he doesn't do sit down interviews. Like, and I think that makes it more interesting. It makes it more fly on the wall. Like we have to be following Gibby around. We have to, be following him buying something from Best Buy or, him in the park feeding bird. Like he can't sit still and do a sit down interview. We've tried and it was like, it's not, maybe it's, he likes to be in control, or I think it's just generally, he's just always moving and always, has to be doing something while getting interviewed.
He's a pretty high anxiety person. Like he doesn't like to sit still. So yeah, we learned that early on. Like, don't do a formal sit down interview because the better stuff will always be when he's not in the chair. As soon as he's in the chair, it gets stiff.
It's probably the most I've ever seen one of the main interview subjects of a documentary walking around throughout the whole documentary. Yeah, I love that about it. It's awesome.
I also learned early on that it was better to just use an iPhone. So that's what I did. I would put a mic on them to get good sound, but then rather than having a DSLR where I had to like worry about focus and just like an iPhone that I'm holding here, it's barely noticeable. I got better results. And it's like, I'll live with a little less image quality in order to get the better interview.
The scene that I got the strongest emotional response from, other than the, thing we won't talk about toward the end that's in a Texas
bombshell.
Yeah. But even more than that to me was the scene where he references Neil Young and then
Yeah.
the quotes from Tired Eyes start
Yeah.
coming in, which is, one of my all-time favorite tracks.
Oh,
And
great.
That's my favorite Neil Young song as well. And I always
Yeah.
love that line that Gibby loves as well.
He tried to do his best, but he could not.
Yes, that is a
Yeah.
profound line.
Yeah, but I had a question because it almost takes on like a music video quality of letting the song take over the scene and having Gibby kind of just like staring off into space deep in thought. And I found myself mesmerized by this and deeply moved. And then I realized, like, wait a second. Is this actually, and this is, you can decline to answer if you want, but was that actually him thinking about Neil Young in that moment, or was that other footage that you found to be appropriate for, cutting against people discussing that song as it relates to him?
It's the latter.
Okay.
But
Gibby he is deep in thought.
Yeah.
he's
Surprisingly
definitely
a
deep in
lot.
thought, yeah.
Yeah.
Times I wouldn't even notice, and he'll, there's certain moments, like, for example, when they talk about River Phoenix when he's on the bench, there are certain moments where he'll get, just the guy who's lived such a huge life like that is like, he does get like that.
One of the things we were playing with at one point, which we didn't really do, was like a string of him saying, I don't know what to say about that, man.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what he'd often say when I asked really hard, painful questions about like River Phoenix's death. And, it's like, he just clam up because he really didn't know what to say about that.
Yeah.
He was trying to be respectful, I guess, of dead people and his own, pain.
Yeah,
So
it always sounded pretty, the way he said I don't know what you want me to say about, like, he did, a lot of it does seem like he just went in and just, stuff he didn't think about.
It's like those feelings are, it's deep shit. It's like he feels horrible about some things and he just simply doesn't know what to say.
Yeah.
So, he's a man for all his sort of transgressive aesthetic impulses, just talking about his own feelings is not something that comes easily. Like he is a man from Texas, born in the 50s. It's not something that sort of demographic was ever known for.
Yeah.
Like kids growing up now are more familiar with talking about our feelings just from the public or the kind of zeitgeist where that's more accepted.
One thing like King said that was interesting about his, like, Gibby and Paul and their sort of, this Texas, macho mentality is like, King was like, oh, I don't know if it's I do think it's a Texas thing, and I think it's definitely like a, baby boomer, type thing. But like King was like, oh, I think it's just a man thing. And it's like, you sort of think about it and it's like, these are just like pretty, as artsy and non-gender conforming as they are, they are these just like men from Texas. So it is kind of like it's like a masculine thing, I think, that they're very, of that time. I think King was on to something when he brought that up.
Yeah. I'm going to wrap it up here with one more question. Tom, I wanted to talk a little more about your experience with Freaked, which, as we said earlier, originated as something of a Butthole Surfers vehicle. To me, it almost serves as an inversion of their rise to mega fame, where they brought something incredibly weird and daring to the mainstream through a major label, while a major studio had funded your film and then seemed to kind of drop the ball on the release of the film. How do you see your relationship to success and regret, a major theme in this movie, in relationship to the arc of the Butthole Surfers?
Wow. Well, that's going to take a while.
I saved the good one for last.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a weird career. I had early success, right? And I got to make a feature film for 20th Century Fox when I was 25, and thought I was hot shit. And then that film got shelved essentially. And then I thought I suck. And I must be a total failure. And who am I kidding with all this stuff, all in my mid 20s, right? So, and then, my dreams of being the next Stanley Kubrick didn't really happen, right? So you have to, like many other people, I'm sure, you have to grapple with reality and the fact that it was like hard for me to make feature films at all after that. And I guess this would be my next feature film officially, 30 years later. But in the interim, I worked in TV, and had a lot of, was able to do a lot of fun things in TV. But so I had like early mainstream success in getting to make a film
Yeah.
that was a studio film. But then I was sort of sent back into the, you know, ranks of obscurity and just doing more less more niche stuff, Adult Swim comedies and such. Yeah. For me, it was like humbling,
Yeah.
right? Humbling, and like I had to deal with my ego problems, and
Sure.
but that was kind of a good thing for me. I think it was a healthy journey to not, to be humble and appreciate what I do have, and what I have been able to do, regardless of my haughty aspirations, and so I guess I'd prefer to have my trajectory in that, I can still make this. Well, I don't know, man. I mean, I'm happy to have made this film. It's like a full
Yeah.
circle thing for me. Cause yeah, like I had, kind of, I always had more esoteric and alternative tastes, right? And I kind of, as a young artist, I was, full of contempt for mainstream shit, right? And like, but over the years, my contempt for mainstream shit has lessened, and sort of like, a lot of shit I didn't like back then, I like now. And because a lot of it's just like, creating your own identity by all the shit you hate, right?
Yeah.
Which is a young man's game, I think, and
Absolutely.
as you get older, you realize, well, a lot of these decisions I made, aesthetic decisions I've made were kind of arbitrary and just, going along with my little circle of friends and whatnot. And um, so, as I've gotten older and wiser, I'm definitely more open aesthetically and more, like there's still a lot of shit I'm not interested in, but there's some stuff that other people like that I used to look down on that can appreciate more.
Mhm.
That was a rambling answer, but I give you something.
I mean, I learned like from Tom, I kind of, again, like Tom was saying, it's a young man's game, and I, relate greatly to like Tom's story and stuff. Is that like, there's certain things that, and I feel like I've really learned and recently learned, within, the last year of just working, having made this, that I learned from Tom is like Tom would always say, it's like, okay, like, we can make this movie for like, the elitist music snob types, i.e.
Right.
like people like me, or we can sort of make it for everybody. And I've started to realize like making it kind of for everybody was the right choice, because I've seen documentaries, examples, the Slint documentary I love, but only people that really love Slint and are total Slint fans will love it because it's just total
Yeah.
talking heads. And then watching a documentary about a subject who I really didn't know anything about, and it was just kind of talking heads, I kind of realized like, oh, Tom is fully on the stuff with, I was never really like, I never coming out, a film snob. I was like direct cinema and cinema verite, and reenactment stuff wasn't as interesting to me. But then after working on this movie, it sort of realized like you need that stuff to A,
Yeah.
be entertaining and fit the also, be fit the aesthetic. So I've learned, I think, from Tom, to get those kind of like, you can do mainstream taste for sure. Like Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo says, like, I can appreciate anybody that can inject art into the mainstream. I think that's, what Tom really did really well with this movie is this is a weird, absurd, shocking, and, transgressive movie, but it has a structure and it has a heart and it has, I think something that, your grandma who doesn't even know who like Pearl Jam is could
Mhm.
watch and be like, oh, it's so I think, I've really learned to approach mainstream sensibilities with like positivity as long as you're injecting some of yourself. I learned that from Tom pretty, recently.
Yeah, I mean, I knew I couldn't. We didn't want to make something that was so esoteric. I want to expand their. They were underappreciated in their heyday, right?
Yeah.
So I want to offer a corrective for that, and for posterity to invite more people in to appreciate what they were all about.
And I mean, like, one final thought. I mean, I always think about like this, alterna or weirder stuff that's not in the mainstream. It travels upstream so quickly. Like, like what, for example, just like Tom's career, Freaked, was underseen, underappreciated at the time, maybe, but several years later, it's a big cult film, and the movie The Substance, I think, that's literally just a Freak remake. It's completely so you have that this stuff really travels upstream. Where Tom did the Andy Milonakis show, which is a huge thing for my generation and above. So.
I was a big fan of that show. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
We had such fun doing that.
That was a show that my mom thought was like evil and I shouldn't be watched. That's like one of the only things she ever told me not to watch. Like she saw me watching and was like, "What is going on here?"
It's a pretty wholesome show, but it catches you. So, there's something off about it.
It's just so strange that she wasn't comfortable, I think. Like she just thought there's something wrong here, and my 13, 14-year-old son shouldn't be watching this, which is very funny. Anyway, we are going to wrap it up here. Okay. This movie is awesome. Tell us about the release of it. Where and how can people see this movie?
Well, we don't know yet because we haven't sold it. We've had interest from distributors, but it's a very tough market these days with independent docs. And I will say that, like, I was worried about the market because the Devo doc came out at Sundance a year and a half ago to great acclaim and then didn't sell, but just sold to Netflix.
Yeah.
So you have to be patient. That's what we're told. And we're doing the festival circuit. We're playing a bunch of festivals in Europe in the fall. We're playing Melbourne in August. So we got to update our webpage to kind of put those festivals.
And the Butthole Surfers Instagram page, I think, and we might do like a page for the movie. I think we'll, for all those there's going to be a lot of different local festivals all around across the country. So that, if people are interested, to definitely, show up and give, have head.
Yeah. Like we're playing at the Sidewalk Film Festival in Birmingham, Alabama in September?
August 18th to 20th.
August 18th.
Yeah.
So if you're in Alabama, come check it out.
In the world of distribution listens to this show. So buy this movie.
Yes.
Put it out. This is awesome. You got to do it, people. And if you're going to be at a festival where it's screening, make sure you roll out, check it out, giving it my highest recommendation. Tom Stern, Simon Weinstein, thank you for coming on the show and giving me some of your time.
Thank you, Eddie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having us, Eddie.
Chick farm, like a seahorse, like a graveyard, like a moron, like a girlfriend, like a tissue, like a cardboard, like a brick wall, like a dream waiting to be. Like a ballpark, like a hiccup, like a blood clot, like a brain stroke, like a long trip, like it's hell-bent, like a dream that I can't see. Like a housewife, like a rapist, like a teacup, like a bedpan, like a cold sore, like an old friend. Ah, you seem so removed. Tell me more. I mean, was he a heavy doper or... was he just a loser? He was a friend of yours. What do you mean he had bullet holes in his mirrors? He tried to do his best, but he could not.